Colonel Malik Sterling stood frozen inside the convenience store, electricity surging through his body as the taser probes sank into his skin. His military identification card slipped from his fingers and landed beside the carton of milk he had come to buy. Through a vision blurred by pain, he caught the satisfied smile of Officer Harlan Voss before everything went black. Moments earlier, Sterling had been on a video call with the Joint Chiefs about his upcoming promotion. Before we go deeper into this shocking story of injustice and the fight for accountability, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Give this a like if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, and subscribe to join our community seeking truth and justice. Now let us uncover how a decorated military officer became the victim of racial profiling and how the entire system was about to be turned upside down. Colonel Malik Sterling had just moved to a predominantly white suburb of Atlanta after decades of distinguished military service. At 52, with multiple combat deployments and a chest full of medals, Sterling had faced enemy fire without flinching, yet nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. On what seemed like an ordinary afternoon, he pulled into the parking lot of Quick Stop Convenience in his modest sedan, dressed in jeans and a navy polo shirt. His military identification rested in his wallet beside photographs of his wife, Dr. Amara Sterling, and their son Zion, a 19-year-old West Point cadet following in his father's footsteps. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Sterling picked up a carton of milk, some bread, and a few other groceries. The cashier, a young college student named Quinn, nodded in greeting as Sterling approached the counter. Outside, Officer Harlan Voss, a 38-year-old white officer with the local police department, received a call about a robbery 3 blocks away. The description was vague. A man approximately 6 feet tall, dark clothing. Voss had spent years on the force and had accumulated multiple complaints from minority residents, all mysteriously dismissed by internal affairs. His colleagues nicknamed him the Enforcer for his aggressive tactics in the town's increasingly diverse neighborhoods. Voss spotted Sterling through the store window and immediately pulled into the parking lot, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon as he entered the building. The bell above the door jingled when Voss stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the store until they locked on Sterling, completely ignoring the other 3 customers, all of whom were white. "Police! Don't move!" Voss shouted, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at Sterling, who stood motionless with his wallet half pulled from his pocket. "Hands where I can see them, on the ground. Now. Don't reach for anything." The contradictory orders came rapid fire, leaving Sterling confused about which to obey first. "Officer, I'm just buying groceries," Sterling said calmly, his military training kicking in under crisis. "I'm going to take out my identification. I am Colonel Malik Sterling, United States Army." When Sterling's hand moved toward his back pocket, where his wallet held his military identification, Officer Voss did not hesitate. Without any warning, he fired his taser, sending 50,000 volts through Sterling's body. The colonel's 6'2" frame seized violently, muscles contracting as the probes embedded in his chest. He crashed to the floor, toppling a display of snacks, his purchases scattering across the linoleum. The milk carton burst, white liquid spreading beneath him like a strange shadow, while his military identification slid from his fingers. Quinn, the cashier, remained frozen in shock while another customer began recording on her phone. Officer Voss advanced, flipping Sterling roughly onto his stomach despite the colonel's obvious suffering. "I've got a combative suspect," Voss said into his radio while twisting Sterling's arms behind his back, the handcuffs biting into his skin. "Requesting backup at the Quick Stop on Maple Avenue." Sterling, nearly unconscious, felt his heart racing irregularly, a dangerous arrhythmia triggered by the electrical discharge. His breathing grew labored. Every inhalation was a struggle against the contracted muscles of his chest. "I can't breathe," he gasped, the words barely audible. Voss ignored him, calling for more officers instead of medical assistance. "Suspect neutralized," he reported with a faint note of satisfaction in his voice. "Disobeyed orders and made threatening movements." A young Asian woman stepped forward from the back of the store, her expression determined. "He needs medical attention immediately," she said firmly. "I'm Sienna Chen, a medical student at Emory. He's showing signs of cardiac distress. You need to call an ambulance right now." Voss turned toward her, his hand moving again toward the taser. "Step back, ma'am. This is a police matter. If you interfere, you'll be arrested too." Sienna did not back down. "I am documenting his medical condition as a witness. His pulse is irregular and he is having difficulty breathing. These are signs of possible cardiac complications from the taser. If he dies because you denied him medical care, that will be recorded as well." Sterling's vision began to darken at the edges as he fought to stay conscious. The cold floor pressed against his cheek, milk soaking into his clothes. He thought of Amara and Zion, wondering if he would see them again. The last thing he registered before losing consciousness was the sound of more sirens approaching, and Officer Voss telling another arriving officer that he had one of them trying to act important, military identification probably fake. General Elias Thorne was reviewing deployment strategies in his Pentagon office when his aide burst in without knocking, an unprecedented breach of protocol that immediately signaled the gravity of the situation. "Sir, you need to see this right now," the aide said, placing a tablet on the desk. The video playing on the screen showed Colonel Malik Sterling, Thorne's friend of 25 years and one of the most respected officers in the Army, convulsing on the floor of a convenience store while a police officer stood over him. Thorne felt his blood run cold as he watched his friend, the man who had saved his life twice in Afghanistan, lying helpless and handcuffed. "Get me everything on this immediately and connect me with the Secretary of Defense," he ordered in a voice that was dangerously calm. Within a short time, the video had circulated through the highest levels of the Pentagon, reaching the Secretary of Defense, who immediately contacted the White House. Sterling was no ordinary officer. He was the architect of a classified cybersecurity program called Sentinel Shield that protected critical military infrastructure from foreign attacks. His security clearance was among the highest in the Army, and his current work was considered vital to national security. The attack on Sterling was not only an assault on a black man or a military officer, it was potentially a threat to national security. Colonel Vivian Lang, head of the Civil Military Affairs Division of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, was pulled from a conference and assigned to lead the Pentagon's response team. A brilliant attorney with experience in both military and civilian courts, Lang had built her career navigating the complex intersection between military authority and civilian law enforcement. "Wheels up in 20 minutes, Colonel," her superior told her. "Full authority granted under Protocol Delta 9. But Lang immediately understood the weight of invoking Protocol Delta 9, a rarely used measure that allowed direct military intervention when key personnel faced an imminent threat. By the time Lang and her team of 8 military lawyers and intelligence officers landed in Atlanta, the situation had grown even worse. Sterling had been taken to the local Memorial Hospital, but remained in police custody, and his family had been denied access. The local police chief, Damon Graves, had issued a statement claiming Sterling matched the description of an armed robbery suspect and had disobeyed legitimate orders, despite the fact that the store's security footage clearly contradicted that version of events. Long established a command center at the local military recruiting office, transforming the modest space into a high-tech operations hub within hours. Military communications equipment replaced recruitment posters, and armed military police stood guard outside. Her first call was to the local police department. "This is Colonel Vivian Lang of the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. I am calling regarding Colonel Malik Sterling, currently detained at the Memorial Hospital. I need to speak with Chief Graves immediately." After being kept on hold for a deliberately long delay, she was finally connected to Chief Graves. "Chief Graves, I am informing you that Colonel Sterling is a high-ranking military officer working on classified national security matters. I have documentation requiring his immediate release into military custody." Graves's response was dismissive. "With all due respect, Colonel, this is a local police matter. Your man was involved in a criminal investigation. Military rank does not exempt anyone from following police orders. He is being treated like any other suspect." Long's voice remained professional, but took on a steely edge. "Chief Graves, I am not requesting. I am informing you that under federal statute related to the protection of critical defense personnel, the Department of Defense is assuming jurisdiction. I have sent documentation to your department and am prepared to present federal court orders if necessary." When Graves continued to resist, Lang played her decisive card. "Chief, perhaps I have not been clear enough. This is not a jurisdictional disagreement. This is a matter of national security. Colonel Sterling possesses critical information for ongoing defense operations. His security clearance level requires federal protection protocols. I have authorization from the highest levels to resolve this situation." Graves's tone shifted from dismissive to concerned. "Are you threatening to take over my department?" Colonel Lang answered calmly. "I am explaining the consequences of obstructing a national security protocol. My team will arrive at your station shortly with the necessary documentation. I expect your full cooperation." After ending the call, Lang contacted her Pentagon liaison. "We need to involve the White House. Local authorities are resisting." In less than an hour, the president had been briefed, and federal agents from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security were dispatched to the town. When Lang approached the police station with her team, she found it surrounded by local officers, some in tactical gear. Chief Graves stood on the steps, flanked by the mayor and several uniformed officers. "This remains my jurisdiction," Graves announced as Lang approached. Long nodded to her communications officer, who received a message through his earpiece and then showed Graves the screen of his tablet. On it was a direct video call from the White House Chief of Staff. "Chief Graves, this is a matter of national security, not local law enforcement. The President has authorized all necessary measures to secure Colonel Sterling and investigate the incident. Your cooperation is expected but not required for this operation to proceed." Graves looked up to see federal agents establishing a perimeter around his station and military vehicles arriving with additional personnel. His face flushed with anger as he realized he was losing control of the situation. Meanwhile, at the Memorial Hospital, Sterling remained unconscious, his heart rhythm still irregular from the taser discharge. Doctors had been prevented from performing necessary tests by the officers guarding his room, who insisted on keeping him handcuffed to the bed despite his medical condition. A nurse secretly contacted Sterling's wife, Dr. Amara Sterling, who rushed to the hospital only to be blocked by officers claiming ongoing investigation protocols. When she identified herself as a physician and demanded to see her husband's medical records, she was threatened with arrest for interference. As federal agents and military police converged on the hospital, the local officers found themselves outnumbered and without authority. Lang personally supervised the transfer of security responsibility, ensuring Sterling received proper medical care while establishing a military protection cordon around his room. "Colonel Sterling is now under federal protection," Lang informed the hospital administrator. "Any medical decisions will be made by his family and military medical personnel. Local police no longer have authority in this matter." Back at the police station, federal agents began securing evidence, including Officer Voss's body camera, department communications, and personnel files. Chief Graves watched in stunned silence as his authority was systematically dismantled. "This isn't over," he muttered toward Lang as she coordinated the operation. Long looked at him with unwavering eyes. "You're right, Chief Graves. This is only the beginning." Dr. Amara Sterling was finishing a complicated pediatric surgery when her colleague, Dr. Peterson, burst into the scrub room with his phone in hand. "Amara, you have to see this right now," he said, his voice trembling as he held up the phone showing a social media video. Amara still wore her surgical gloves when she saw the images of her husband convulsing on the floor of a convenience store while a police officer handcuffed him. The surgical mask could not hide the horror in her eyes. "I have to go," she whispered, barely remembering to complete the post-operative protocols before running to her car. The drive to the Memorial Hospital was a blur of frantic calls and desperate prayers. When she arrived, 2 police officers blocked the entrance to the emergency department. "Ma'am, you can't go in," one officer said coldly. "That area is restricted due to an ongoing investigation." Amara straightened her back, summoning the authority she used in the operating room. "I am Dr. Amara Sterling. The man you are holding is my husband, Colonel Malik Sterling. As his wife and as a physician, I demand to see him immediately." The officer's expression did not change. "No exceptions, ma'am. Police orders." Before Amara could respond, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Dr. Sterling, I am an emergency room nurse. Your husband is in room 4. His condition is stable but concerning. They will not let anyone near him except the police." Amara's professional composure cracked as she realized her husband was only a few meters away, potentially in medical danger, and she could not reach him. Her hands trembled as she called the hospital's chief of medicine, a colleague who promised to intervene but warned that the police were acting with unusual aggression. News of Sterling's situation spread through the community like wildfire. Reverend Caleb Ellison of First Baptist Church, a longtime civil rights activist and community leader, received 7 calls in 5 minutes from congregants who had seen the video. "Not again," he murmured, immediately activating the community emergency response network established after previous incidents of police misconduct. In less than an hour, more than 50 people had gathered outside the hospital, their numbers growing by the minute. Veterans in military caps stood shoulder to shoulder with civil rights activists, their presence silent but firm. Social media amplified the story exponentially. The hashtag Justice for Colonel began trending nationally, accompanied by the convenience store images looping constantly across every platform. National news vans appeared on the scene, reporters preparing live broadcasts with the growing crowd as a backdrop. Chief Damon Graves, sensing the situation slipping from his control, hastily organized a press conference on the steps of the police station. Flanked by nervous-looking officers, he cleared his throat before addressing the assembled media. Earlier this afternoon, local police responded to reports of suspicious activity at the Quick Stop on Maple Avenue. The suspect matched the description of an individual linked to a recent robbery in the area. When Officer Voss attempted to question the suspect, the individual became confrontational and made threatening movements. Officer Voss followed standard department protocols for control and immobilization of the subject. "We are conducting a thorough investigation of the incident." The gathered crowd booed Graves's statement, drowning out his attempts to continue. A reporter shouted, "Chief Graves! The video clearly shows Colonel Sterling trying to present his identification before being tased. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Graves's face turned red. "The video does not show the entire interaction. Our officer perceived a threat and responded accordingly." Another voice cut through the chaos. "I have the entire interaction." The crowd parted to reveal Amir Rahman, the owner of Quick Stop, holding a USB drive. "My security system recorded everything, from the moment Colonel Sterling entered my store until the ambulance took him away. I have given copies to the media and to military authorities." Rahman, a Pakistani American who had owned the store for years, stepped forward. "Officer Voss has harassed me and my customers before. Months ago, he accused me of selling to minors without checking identification and threatened to revoke my business license. When I showed him my security recordings proving we check everyone, he said people like me should not be running businesses in nice neighborhoods like this one." Rahman's revelation sent ripples through the crowd as reporters rushed to obtain copies of the footage. Meanwhile, the gathering outside the hospital had grown to hundreds. What had begun as a small group had transformed into a massive demonstration with people carrying improvised signs reading, "Justice for Colonel Sterling," and "End Police Racism Now." The crowd included people of every race, age, and background, but especially striking were the military veterans, many in pieces of uniform, standing in silent solidarity. As evening approached, the protesters illuminated the area with phone flashlights and candles, creating a solemn glow around the hospital. The scene took on an even more powerful dimension when Zion, Sterling's 19-year-old son, arrived. The West Point cadet had driven through the night after seeing the video. He arrived in his dress uniform and, without saying a word, placed himself directly in front of the police line in a military rest position, his expression a mask of contained anguish. The officers shifted uncomfortably under his unwavering gaze. Inside the hospital, Sterling finally regained consciousness, disoriented and in pain. His first words were a whisper, "Amara," directed at the military nurse who had replaced the police guards after the Pentagon's intervention. He had no idea of the storm gathering outside, no knowledge of how his personal tragedy had ignited a national fire. As the night progressed, the demonstration grew increasingly tense. When a group of counter-protesters formed across the street, about 50 people, many wearing Blue Lives Matter clothing, and some identified as off-duty officers, they gathered with their own signs supporting Officer Voss and the police department. The two groups exchanged heated words across the avenue, the atmosphere charged with the potential for conflict. "How would you feel if your loved one were denied medical care while being unjustly detained?" Comment 1 If you believe family members should always have access to medical information, regardless of the circumstances. If you think our service members deserve better treatment than Colonel Sterling received, give this a like right now. And if you want to see justice done in this case, subscribe to follow this story as it develops. The question hung in the air. With the community divided and tensions rising, would the truth about what really happened in that convenience store finally come to light? Let us discover what happens when federal investigators begin to dig deep into the local police department. Federal investigators descended on the town like a surgical strike team. Their methods were precise and their authority absolute. FBI Special Agent Rowan Hale, a veteran of dozens of civil rights investigations, immediately requested the body camera recordings from Officer Voss. "That's going to be a problem," the department's technology officer admitted nervously. Officer Voss's camera appears to have been deactivated approximately 3 minutes before the incident in the store. Hale's expression did not change, but her voice took on a cutting edge. "Interesting timing. I want the camera, all access logs to the evidence server, and the last 4 weeks of Officer Voss's recordings. Now." The Pentagon sent its own team of digital forensics specialists, experts who normally worked counterterrorism cases, led by Major Sanjay Patel. The team bypassed the police department's security measures and recovered footage that had been marked for deletion. "You need to see this," Patel told Colonel Lang, showing video from Voss's previous shift. The recovered footage showed Voss and his partner, Officer Quinn Wilson, in their patrol car talking about the new arrivals to the town. "We've got another one moving into the Heights," Wilson said. "Some military type driving a black sedan with Virginia plates." Voss's response chilled everyone in the room. Maybe it's time to teach these outsiders a lesson about respecting the natural order around here. When confronted with the recordings, Officer Wilson broke immediately. "It was just talk," he insisted. "Ryan gets wound up sometimes, but it doesn't mean anything." Agent Hale leaned forward. "So it's just a coincidence that the next day your partner tased a black military officer who was driving a black sedan with Virginia plates?" Wilson's face lost all color as he understood the implication. As the investigation expanded, FBI agents discovered that Voss's personnel file contained 17 complaints of excessive force during his years on the force. All involved minority individuals, and all had been dismissed by internal affairs. Even more disturbing was the systematic pattern of burying these complaints, with evidence suggesting direct intervention by Chief Graves in at least 11 cases. A search warrant for electronic communications revealed a private Facebook group called Blue Line, where several department officers shared racist memes and discussed harassment tactics aimed at minority residents. One post by Voss from only weeks earlier read, "Another diversity hire moved on to Maple Street. Let's see how long they last after a few special traffic stops." The investigation took an even more sinister turn when Colonel Lang discovered that Sterling was not the first minority military personnel targeted by the local police. Cross-referencing military records with police reports revealed 3 previous incidents involving black and Hispanic service members, all reported to military authorities but dismissed when presented to the local police department. Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had been stopped 9 times in 1 month after moving to the town, despite having no traffic violations. Lieutenant Shaw Jackson had had his house surrounded by police responding to a burglary call while he was moving furniture. And more recently, Captain Tianguian had been stopped for suspicious behavior while jogging in his new neighborhood. Amir Rahman, the store owner, provided investigators with additional security recordings showing that Officer Voss had previously followed Sterling during an earlier visit to the store, watching him from the parking lot without entering. "He does this often," Rahman explained. "He follows certain customers, especially new faces if they are not white. Sometimes he comes in and stands uncomfortably close to them, asking if they need help finding something in a way that doesn't sound helpful at all." Sienna Chen, the medical student who had intervened during Sterling's arrest, contacted Colonel Lang after patrol cars began parking in front of her building. "They're just sitting there watching my comings and goings," she reported. "Last night an officer followed me to the library and sat at the next table, staring at me for 2 hours. The investigation revealed a disturbing economic dimension to the pattern of harassment. Financial records showed unusual payment structures between the police union, local government officials, and several real estate agencies. FBI forensic accountants discovered that property values in the town had been artificially maintained through a combination of aggressive police surveillance targeting minorities and financial incentives to preserve what internal emails described as the traditional character of the community. Agent Hale expanded the investigation to include real estate records, discovering that minority homebuyers were systematically steered away from certain neighborhoods, and those who managed to purchase a home faced an immediate increase in police scrutiny. The pattern was clear. The local police department, with the tacit approval of local government, was enforcing an unofficial policy of racial exclusion. While Sterling recovered in the hospital, now under military protection, he began documenting his own experiences with local police since moving to the area months earlier. "I've been stopped 4 times, he told Colonel Lang from his bed, his voice still weak from the residual effects of the taser. Each time the officer claimed a minor traffic violation, but they never issued a ticket. They always seemed surprised when they saw my military identification and suddenly became more professional. Voss was one of those officers 2 weeks ago. He definitely recognized me in that store." The most incriminating evidence came from an unexpected source. A junior officer within the department, Paige Jenkins, contacted Colonel Lang through a secure military channel requesting protection in exchange for information. "I can't let them see me talking to you," she explained during their clandestine meeting at a restaurant 30 miles from town. "But I've been documenting everything for the past 3 years. Jenkins handed over an encrypted flash drive containing recordings of department meetings, including one in which Chief Graves explicitly told officers they needed to make certain neighborhoods uncomfortable for undesirable elements through intensive patrols and pretextual stops. "Focus on the new developments," Brooks could be heard saying on the recording. "We need to maintain community standards, and that means being proactive about who feels welcome here." The evidence painted a picture that was not about isolated incidents, but about systematic, organized discrimination emanating from the highest levels of local authority. As Sterling continued his recovery, the investigation expanded beyond the town, revealing connections to similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions. What had begun as a response to the actions of a single officer was rapidly evolving into one of the largest civil rights investigations in recent history. General Elias Thorne stood before the Joint Chiefs in the Pentagon's secure conference room, his expression grave as he described the situation. "Gentlemen, we have a level 1 threat against military personnel and operations. Colonel Malik Sterling, one of our most valuable officers and a key figure in our cybersecurity infrastructure, was assaulted by local police. Given that specific threats against minority military personnel have already been documented, I am invoking Military Protection Protocol 47. The room fell silent. Protocol 47 was a rarely used measure created after the Civil Rights era but seldom implemented, allowing military protection of personnel under specific threat when local authorities were considered compromised. "The Secretary of Defense has approved activation of the protocol," Thorne continued. "We are deploying military police units to secure the hospital where Colonel Sterling is recovering and establish a security cordon for his family." Within hours, 24 military police in full uniform arrived at the Memorial Hospital, relieving the federal agents and establishing a formal military presence. Their arrival caused a stir among local residents, many of whom had never seen active-duty military operating in a law enforcement capacity on American soil. Colonel Lang expanded her legal command center, now coordinating directly with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Attorney General Rebecca Chen called personally to assure Lang that the full weight of the Justice Department stood behind the investigation. "This is not just about one officer or one department," Chen said. "This case has the potential to set new precedents for addressing systemic discrimination in law enforcement." As news of the military's direct involvement spread, Sterling's former colleagues began arriving in town, officers with whom he had served during his decades of service. They traveled from across the country, many still on active duty, others long retired. His former unit, the 525th Military Intelligence Brigade, organized a volunteer security detachment for the Sterling family with off-duty military personnel, ensuring that Dr. Amara Sterling and their son Zion were protected around the clock. The governor of Georgia initially resisted federal intervention, calling it overreach of military authority. States' rights are being trampled by federal interference in local law enforcement matters, he declared at an improvised press conference. His position changed dramatically after Colonel Lang requested a private meeting and presented the accumulated evidence. "This is not political, Governor," Lang explained, showing him transcripts of the police department's internal communications. "This is a clear pattern of constitutional violations and civil rights abuses with possible implications for national security." The governor left the meeting pale-faced and immediately announced the state's full cooperation with federal authorities. The state attorney general followed with the announcement of a formal investigation into the local police department and several neighboring jurisdictions implicated in the evidence. The Army legal team led by Lang prepared a comprehensive civil rights case that went far beyond Sterling's individual experience. Drawing on the evidence provided by Officer Jenkins and the pattern of harassment against minority service members, they built a case alleging systematic discrimination and constitutional violations as departmental policy. Against medical advice, Sterling discharged himself from the hospital on the fourth day, determined to address the growing crowd of supporters who had maintained a constant vigil outside. Supported by a cane, his body still showing the effects of the taser attack, he stood before hundreds of supporters, the media, and a national television audience. "I have worn this country's uniform for 30 years, Sterling began, his voice stronger than his physical appearance suggested. "I have bled for America in 3 combat zones. I have sent men and women into danger to defend our Constitution and our way of life. And yet in my own country, dressed in civilian clothes, I was judged not by that service or by my character, but by the color of my skin." His words resonated beyond the immediate crowd, the speech going viral within minutes. "This is not about me," Sterling continued. "I am here because I have the protection of the United States Armed Forces and the federal government. How many others have faced similar treatment with no one to intervene? How many lives have been damaged or destroyed by the very people sworn to protect and serve? This must end, not only in this town, but across our nation." The military community mobilized nationally, with the campaign "Stand with Sterling" spreading across every platform. Veterans groups issued statements of support, and active duty personnel at bases across the country held silent demonstrations during their off-duty hours. The police union, feeling the pressure, attempted to reframe the narrative. Their spokesman appeared on conservative news channels characterizing the investigation as anti-police rather than anti-racist. "This is a dangerous precedent of military interference in civilian law enforcement," the union representative argued. "A single incident, however unfortunate, does not justify this level of federal intervention." Chief Graves, increasingly isolated as evidence against his department mounted, called in favors from neighboring jurisdictions. Police officers from nearby counties arrived in a show of solidarity, parking their patrol cars in long rows in front of the police station. The visual standoff between military personnel and local police created a tense atmosphere throughout the town. Sterling met privately with his military superiors, including General Thorne, who had flown in to personally assess the situation. "Malik, this goes beyond your individual case," Thorne explained. "The Pentagon is preparing to offer you a position leading a new task force on civil-military relations and police reform. Your experience, combined with your military record, makes you exceptionally qualified." Sterling considered the offer carefully. "I need to discuss this with Amara and Zion. This is not what I imagined for the final phase of my career, but perhaps this is where I am needed most." As the meeting concluded, military intelligence officers brought troubling news. Intercepted communications from several members of the police department suggested a coordinated effort to intimidate witnesses and destroy evidence. "We must act quickly," Lang warned. "The longer the investigation continues, the more time they will have to cover their tracks." Within the police ranks, cracks began appearing in the wall of solidarity. Several younger officers, disturbed by the evidence emerging about their department's practices, contacted federal investigators through secure channels, offering additional testimony. The town itself grew increasingly divided, with many residents expressing shock at the revelations, while others clung to support for the police department regardless of the evidence. Dr. Amara Sterling received threatening calls at the hospital where she worked, prompting the institution to implement additional security measures. "You and your husband should go back where you came from," one caller threatened, unaware that both Sterlings had been born and raised in Georgia. Military intelligence, monitoring the situation closely, discovered something unexpected. The harassment campaign against the Sterlings and other minority residents appeared connected to a larger network of police departments in several states that shared tactics and information through encrypted channels. What had begun as an investigation into the actions of a single officer was revealing a far larger conspiracy than anyone had imagined. The morning after Sterling's powerful speech, the counterattack began with surgical precision. Police union attorneys filed emergency motions in 3 different courts, alleging federal overreach and jurisdictional violations. "The military has no authority to intervene in civilian law enforcement matters," argued union attorney Richard Simmons on the courthouse steps. "This sets a dangerous precedent that threatens the very foundations of our legal system." Behind the scenes, Mayor Grant Ellis publicly declared full cooperation with federal investigators while privately working to obstruct them at every turn. "Just delay them," he instructed city employees in a leaked email. "Give them what the law requires, absolutely nothing more. We need time to get ahead of this." Officer Voss, the epicenter of the storm, was placed on administrative leave but continued to receive full pay and benefits. The police department issued a statement describing him as a dedicated officer with an exemplary record of service to the community, deliberately omitting the 17 excessive force complaints in his file. The media narrative began to shift as pro-police outlets brought in experts who analyzed the convenience store footage frame by frame, claiming Sterling's movements could reasonably be interpreted as threatening. "If you look here," a former police chief explained on a national broadcast, "his hand moves toward his waist. Any trained officer would recognize this as a possible threat gesture." The campaign extended to Sterling himself when reporters began scrutinizing his military record for flaws. They found one from 20 years earlier. As a young captain, Sterling had received a formal reprimand for exceeding his authority during a training exercise. The minor disciplinary action, long since addressed and surpassed by his distinguished career, was presented as evidence of a pattern of disobedience to authority and proper procedures. On social media, accounts with suspicious activity patterns began sharing memes portraying Sterling as aggressive and anti-police, often using heavily edited versions of the store video. Colonel Lang's team traced these accounts to a coordinated disinformation campaign originating from several groups affiliated with police unions. The streets of the town became the physical manifestation of this information war. A Back the Blue rally organized in front of the police station drew several hundred supporters, some carrying Confederate flags alongside banners supporting the police. Speakers denounced the federal investigation as political persecution and characterized Sterling as someone playing the race card. Counter-protesters arrived, leading to tense confrontations while police officers watched, clearly favoring the pro-police demonstrators in the enforcement of barriers and crowd control. The pressure extended beyond Sterling to everyone connected to the case. Dr. Amara Sterling arrived at her hospital to discover that her surgical privileges were suddenly under review based on anonymous complaints about her competence, despite her impeccable record. The hospital administration, which had initially been supportive, became evasive under pressure from board members with connections to local government. Amir Rahman, the convenience store owner whose security recording had provided crucial evidence, discovered that his business license was suddenly under inspection for alleged health code violations. City inspectors appeared without notice, citing obscure regulations that had never been enforced before. "They're sending a message," Rahman told Colonel Lang during a meeting at the Military Command Center. "Either you back down or you face the consequences." Sienna Chen, the medical student who had intervened during Sterling's arrest, received a notice from her university informing her that she faced academic probation based on anonymous complaints about unprofessional conduct. Her academic advisor, confused by the sudden action against one of the top students, discovered that the complaints originated from email addresses linked to the police department. The harassment also reached Zion, Sterling's son. At West Point, several cadets with family members in law enforcement began socially isolating him, while anonymous complaints about his performance appeared in his file. The academy superintendent, alerted by General Thorne, launched an immediate investigation into the attempted intimidation of a cadet. Local businesses that had expressed support for Sterling faced vandalism and threats. The cafe that had offered free drinks to the protesters awoke to find its windows broken, while the owner of a bookstore displaying a Justice for the Colonel sign received anonymous calls threatening to burn the building down. The most alarming development came when a suspicious fire broke out at Amir Rahman's convenience store, destroying the original security system that had captured the moment Sterling was tased. Although Rahman had already delivered copies to investigators, the message was clear. Those who spoke faced serious consequences. Inside the police department, pressure on potential whistleblowers intensified. Officer Paige Jenkins, who had provided crucial evidence to Colonel Lang, suddenly went silent after receiving a text message with her home address and her children's school schedule, followed by the words, "Think carefully about your future." Federal agents tasked with protecting physical evidence faced constant obstruction from local officials. Documents requested through official channels arrived heavily redacted or mysteriously missing. Digital evidence on police servers was altered or deleted despite preservation orders, forcing technical experts to recover data from backups and alternative sources. Sterling and his family gathered in their temporary quarters inside the military safe house, discussing whether the fight was worth the growing personal cost. "They're going after all of us," Amara said, showing Sterling the letter questioning her medical credentials. "The hospital board meets tomorrow to decide whether to suspend me while they investigate." Zion revealed the harassment he was facing at West Point, while Sterling himself admitted that the physical and emotional toll was greater than he had initially acknowledged. "Maybe we should consider the settlement offer," he suggested quietly, referring to a private approach from city attorneys offering substantial financial compensation in exchange for dropping all claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Military intelligence intercepted communications between Mayor Ellis and the police union attorneys discussing the settlement strategy. "We just need Sterling to take the money and disappear," Ellis wrote. "Once he signs the NDA, the feds lose their star witness and this whole thing dies down." The governor, initially supportive of the federal investigation after seeing the evidence, now faced enormous pressure from police unions across the state. Campaign donations were threatened, and political allies began distancing themselves. His public statements grew increasingly neutral, emphasizing the need for a fair and balanced investigation that respected the difficult work of law enforcement officers. "Do you believe Colonel Sterling should accept the settlement to protect his family from further harassment, or continue fighting for systemic change despite the personal cost?" Comment 1 if you believe individual safety should come first, or 2 if confronting injustice is worth the risk. If the intimidation tactics used against the witnesses in this case outrage you, give this a like right now. And if you want to see how this community responds to the growing pressure, subscribe to follow this developing story. The question now was whether this coordinated campaign of intimidation would succeed in silencing the truth, or whether someone brave enough would break the blue wall of silence. Let us see what happens next at this decisive point. The press conference was scheduled for 9 in the morning in front of the federal courthouse, but no one knew exactly what to expect. Rumors had circulated that Sterling had accepted the settlement offer, and the mood among his supporters was somber. Camera crews pushed for a good angle as Sterling approached the microphone, flanked by his wife, his son, and Colonel Lang. His face showed the strain of the previous weeks, but his voice remained steady as he addressed the crowd. "I have been offered a substantial financial settlement to abandon this case and sign a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever speaking about what happened to me in that convenience store," Sterling began. A murmur ran through those present. The offer came with a carrot and a stick. The carrot was enough money to retire comfortably. The stick was the clear implication that the harassment against my family would continue or worsen if I refused. Sterling paused, looking out at the media and supporters gathered. "I am here today to announce my decision." Another pause. The attention intensified. "Justice is not for sale. Not now, not ever. I reject their offer completely and unconditionally." The crowd erupted in cheers as Sterling continued. "No amount of money can buy my silence in the face of systemic injustice. My family and I will continue this fight, no matter the cost, because this case is larger than us. It is about every person who has faced discrimination and had no Pentagon backing them, no media telling their story, no platform from which to demand justice. As the applause began to subside, an unexpected figure approached the microphone. A young white woman in a police uniform stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. "My name is Officer Paige Jenkins of the local police department," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "For 3 years I have been documenting racial discrimination and misconduct within my department, and I can no longer remain silent." A stunned silence fell over the crowd as Jenkins continued. "After witnessing repeated abuses of power and discriminatory practices, I began recording department meetings and preserving evidence that was being systematically destroyed. I have documentation of explicit directives to target minorities moving into affluent neighborhoods. I have evidence of a coordinated campaign to harass people until they leave the town. And I have proof that Chief Graves and senior officers, including Officer Voss, have participated in a criminal conspiracy to violate the civil rights of residents on racial grounds." Jenkins pulled out a USB drive and held it up. "This contains more than 3 years of recordings, including a meeting where Chief Graves explicitly instructed officers to, and I quote, make life uncomfortable for those people moving into Maple Heights. He specifically told us to find reasons to stop their vehicles, question their activities, and, in his words, help them understand they are not welcome here." As Jenkins spoke, federal agents moved to surround her protectively, aware that she had just painted a target on her own back. She continued with growing firmness. "The department maintains financial records showing kickbacks from traffic fines and civil forfeitures disproportionately targeting minority residents. These funds were distributed through an unofficial bonus system that rewarded the most aggressive officers in enforcing the department's unwritten policies. Most shocking were the private communications Jenkins had preserved. Officer Voss and several others maintained emails and messages with white nationalist groups, sharing information about minority residents and coordinating harassment campaigns. They created a point system that rewarded officers who generated the most complaints or succeeded in driving families out of the community." Jenkins turned to look directly at Sterling. "Colonel Sterling was not selected at random. Officer Voss recognized him from previous encounters and had specifically talked about making an example of the military guy who thinks he's above the law. The taser was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act intended to humiliate and harm a black man who represented everything they resented: success, authority, and respect." The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and national media. Within hours, Jenkins's house was vandalized, windows smashed and racist graffiti painted on the garage door. Death threats flooded her phone and email. Without hesitation, Sterling offered her protection through military channels, relocating her to the same secure facility housing his family. The FBI, now armed with Jenkins's evidence, placed key officers under surveillance, capturing their desperate attempts to destroy remaining evidence. A pre-dawn raid on the police station secured servers and documentation before they could be manipulated. 3 officers, including Voss's partner, Officer Wilson, quickly agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. The dominoes continued to fall when financial records implicated Mayor Ellis in the scandal. Investigators discovered that payments from the police department's Community Outreach Fund had been regularly directed to the mayor's personal consulting firm, coinciding with his interventions to bury complaints against officers. Public opinion shifted dramatically as the evidence became irrefutable. Residents who had defended the police department confronted undeniable proof of systematic discrimination and corruption. Several officers resigned in protest over the department's practices, refusing to be associated with the emerging scandal. Local business leaders, concerned about the town's reputation and economic future, publicly called for complete reform of the department. "This is not just a moral issue, it is an economic one," declared the president of the Chamber of Commerce. "No business wants to relocate to a community known for corruption and discrimination." Military intelligence identified financial connections between police leadership and real estate developers seeking to maintain property values by restricting demographic changes in the community. The complex web of financial incentives behind the department's discriminatory practices became increasingly clear. Sterling testified before a federal grand jury, presenting a powerful personal account of his experience, and the broader pattern of misconduct he had observed since moving to the area. His testimony, combined with Jenkins's evidence and the statements of cooperating officers, created an overwhelming case. The governor, recognizing the gravity of the situation, declared a state of emergency and temporarily placed the police department under state control, appointing an interim chief from the state police force. The most damning piece of evidence emerged from an unexpected source. A bartender at an establishment frequented by officers came forward with a cell phone recording of Voss, visibly drunk, bragging about the incident days after it occurred. "You should have seen the look on his face," Voss could be heard saying. "That arrogant colonel who thought his uniform made him special. I bet he won't try to grab anything next time a real authority figure gives him an order." The recording, authenticated by federal investigators, eliminated any doubt about Voss's motivations and his knowledge of Sterling's identity before using the taser. The evidence against the local police department had become crushing, transforming what began as a single incident of racial profiling into one of the most significant civil rights cases in recent history. The federal grand jury's decision came after only 4 hours of deliberation. Officer Harlan Voss was formally charged with 6 federal counts, including civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, evidence tampering, and conspiracy against rights. The indictments did not stop there. Chief Damon Graves and 5 senior officers faced charges ranging from conspiracy and obstruction of justice to civil rights violations and witness intimidation. Mayor Grant Ellis, seeing what was coming, resigned 48 hours before his own formal indictment on charges of corruption, conspiracy, and misappropriation of public funds. The state attorney general's office took control of the police department, appointing retired state police Colonel Jennifer Martinez as interim chief. Her first official action was to suspend 17 officers pending ongoing investigations and to implement mandatory body camera protocols with civilian oversight. "This department will be rebuilt from the ground up," Martinez announced. "Every policy, every procedure, every aspect of training and community relations will be reimagined with transparency and equal justice as guiding principles." The Department of Justice announced a consent decree requiring a complete restructuring of the police force with 5 years of federal monitoring to ensure compliance. Officer Paige Jenkins, despite the personal and professional risks she had taken, became the center of a growing movement for police accountability. Congressional leaders invited her to testify at hearings on police reform. Her first-hand testimony about the department's internal culture proved invaluable to lawmakers drafting new oversight measures. For Sterling, the case took on dimensions that transcended his personal experience. The president invited him to the White House and publicly apologized for the treatment he had suffered. "No American, especially someone who has served this country with such distinction, should face discrimination from those sworn to protect and serve," the president declared during the televised meeting. Colonel Sterling's experience underscores the work that still remains to fulfill the American promise of equal justice under the law. After the meeting, Sterling was asked to lead a new federal task force on police reform and civil-military relations, leveraging his unique perspective as a military commander and a victim of police misconduct. The position would require his retirement from active duty, a decision he carefully evaluated with his family. The repercussions of the case spread widely. Dr. Amara Sterling was fully vindicated when it was discovered that 3 members of the hospital board were linked to the police conspiracy through financial records. The board chairman resigned after emails revealed his role in initiating the review of her credentials as a favor to Mayor Ellis. The National Association of Chiefs of Police, recognizing the damage the scandal had caused to public trust in law enforcement nationwide, issued a strong statement condemning the department's actions and announcing new national guidelines for accountability and anti-bias training. Several police departments across the country implemented new training protocols, specifically citing Sterling's case as a catalyst for reform. Officer Voss, facing decades in federal prison if convicted on all charges, attempted to flee before his arraignment. He was arrested at a bus station 200 miles away, adding flight to avoid justice to his growing list of accusations. His capture made national headlines. The image of the once arrogant officer in handcuffs became a powerful symbol of accountability. Sienna Chin, whose intervention had potentially saved Sterling's life, and whose testimony proved crucial to the case, received a prestigious scholarship recognizing her courage. "Medical ethics demands action," she said upon accepting the award. "When someone is in danger, regardless of the circumstances, their medical needs must take priority above everything else." Amir Rahman's convenience store, partially damaged in the suspicious fire, became an unexpected community gathering place. Volunteers helped rebuild and expand the space, adding a small cafe and a community room where residents of all backgrounds gathered for healing conversations. The store's security recordings, now preserved in multiple secure locations, were requested by the National Civil Rights Museum for a future exhibition. Reverend Ellison, working with military leaders and community activists, established a civilian police oversight board in the town. The board, composed of residents from every neighborhood and demographic group, would have real authority to review police actions and recommend disciplinary measures. Despite progress toward justice, the Sterling family continued to receive threats from police sympathizers who refused to accept the evidence. Their home remained under military protection with 24-hour security necessary even months after the initial incident. Major civil rights organizations filed class action lawsuits on behalf of other victims identified during the investigation. Dozens of people, mostly Black and Hispanic residents, came forward with accounts of harassment, false arrests, and excessive force stretching back more than a decade. Sterling, still dealing with the physical and psychological effects of the Taser attack, found himself struggling with the decision about his future. The cardiac arrhythmia triggered by the discharge persisted, requiring medication and regular monitoring. Nightmares and anxiety in public places, especially near police officers, affected his daily life despite therapy. "The physical wounds heal faster than the others," he confided to Colonel Lang. "I still flinch when I see a uniform in my peripheral vision. I still feel that electricity running through my body when I wake up in the night." Pentagon officials presented him with unexpected news about his military future. Despite the trauma he had suffered, his security clearance and position had been fully protected. The Army was prepared to promote him to brigadier general as planned, creating a specially modified role that would accommodate his medical needs while leveraging his cybersecurity expertise. The alternative was an honorable retirement with full benefits and the freedom to assume the position on the federal task force, where he could have an even greater impact on civil rights and police reform. Sterling faced the most consequential personal decision of his career: continue his military service in a modified capacity, working within the system to which he had dedicated 3 decades, or step into a new role using his painful experience to drive systemic change in law enforcement. The night before Officer Voss's trial began, Sterling received a cryptic message transmitted through military channels. "The situation in this town is only the tip of the iceberg. Similar networks exist in 12 other jurisdictions. Your case opened the door. The question is whether you are willing to walk through it." The message came from someone inside the Department of Justice, hinting that the investigation had uncovered a far larger conspiracy than had been publicly acknowledged. As Sterling contemplated his path forward, the implications of his choice extended far beyond his personal trajectory. His decision could affect police reform efforts across the country, impacting countless lives for generations. The federal courtroom was packed to capacity on the first day of Officer Harlan Voss's trial. Sterling sat in the front row with his family beside him as the prosecutors presented their opening statements. "This case is about far more than one officer and one victim," the lead prosecutor began. "The evidence will show that Officer Voss's actions were part of a systematic effort to intimidate and expel minority residents from this town, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of local government." As the trial progressed, the true scope of the conspiracy emerged. Digital forensics experts testified about a secure messaging platform used by officers from multiple jurisdictions to share tactics aimed at targeting minority residents while avoiding detection. Voss's phone contained links to similar groups in 12 additional police departments spanning 5 states. The FBI director personally testified about the expansion of the investigation to these departments, describing it as one of the most significant civil rights investigations of the 21st century. After 3 weeks of devastating testimony, The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Voss was convicted on all counts, facing up to 30 years in federal prison. The convictions continued as Chief Graves and 4 other officers were found guilty in subsequent trials. Only one senior officer was acquitted on a technicality, though he resigned from law enforcement immediately after the trial. Sterling made his decision. After 3 decades of distinguished military service, he accepted an early retirement to lead a new civil rights organization he named the Uniformed Justice Foundation. His retirement ceremony became a powerful statement, with hundreds of service members from every background attending, many traveling from different parts of the country to show their support. General Thorne presented Sterling with the Distinguished Service Medal, recognizing not only his military contributions, but his courage in confronting systemic injustice. Colonel Sterling's final act of service to his country may prove to be the most significant, Thorne declared. In facing discrimination, he reminds us that the oath to defend the Constitution applies not only on foreign battlefields, but in our own communities. The Uniformed Justice Foundation quickly gained national prominence, dedicated to protecting the civil rights of military personnel and veterans, with a special focus on racial discrimination. Its funding came from progressive civil rights organizations and conservative veterans groups, creating an unusual coalition united by respect for both military service and constitutional rights. Officer Paige Jenkins, who resigned from law enforcement after her whistleblower testimony, became the Foundation's first police reform advisor. Her insider perspective proved invaluable in developing training programs for departments across the country. Real change must come from within police culture, Jenkins explained in a national interview. We are working with officers who want to serve with integrity, giving them tools to recognize and address systemic problems. The reformed local police department became an unexpected model for community policing initiatives under Chief Martinez's leadership. The department implemented innovative reforms, including community oversight, transparent disciplinary procedures, and training focused on de-escalation and cultural competence. Officers were required to live within the communities they patrolled, and recruitment efforts specifically targeted candidates from diverse backgrounds. A year after the Taser incident, Sterling returned to Amir Rahman's convenience store, now rebuilt and expanded. The location had become something of a civil rights landmark, with visitors from across the country coming to see where the case began. Rahman had used insurance money and community donations to add a community center to the store, where police officers and residents participated in regular dialogue sessions. This is how healing happens, Rahman explained, showing Sterling the wall of photographs documenting the transformation of the site from crime scene to community hub. We turn places of pain into places of progress. Sienna Chen, now a resident physician at the Atlanta Medical Center, established free health clinics in underserved communities around the town. Colonel Sterling's case taught me that speaking up matters, even when it is difficult, she told local reporters. My medical training taught me to treat the body, but this experience taught me to address the social conditions that create health disparities from the start. Zion Sterling graduated from West Point with honors, delivering a commencement speech on integrity and justice that received a standing ovation. My father taught me that wearing a uniform means accepting responsibility, not only for following orders, but for upholding the principles those orders are meant to serve, the young lieutenant told his classmates. True loyalty sometimes requires the courage to confront injustice, even when it wears the same uniform you do. Dr. Amara Sterling became chief of surgery at her hospital, implementing programs to address disparities in healthcare access and mentoring minority medical students. Her experiences during the case shaped her approach to institutional change, focusing on systemic reforms rather than simple individual accommodations. The Sterling case became required reading in police academies and military training programs across the country. Cadets and recruits analyzed not only what went wrong in that convenience store, but how multiple systems failed to prevent or address discrimination until federal intervention forced accountability. At Voss's sentencing hearing, Sterling surprised the courtroom by requesting to address the court. With permission granted, he faced his assailant directly for the first time since the store. Mr. Voss's actions reflect failures that extend far beyond any individual, Sterling declared calmly. While he must be held accountable for his choices, True justice requires not only punishment but transformation, not only of Mr. Voss, but of the systems that enabled and protected him. Sterling revealed that his foundation would oversee Voss's eventual reintegration into society. Redemption must remain possible, even for those who denied that possibility to others. Our foundation will follow Mr. Voss's case through his incarceration and beyond, offering rehabilitation support while ensuring accountability. The judge sentenced Voss to 25 years in federal prison, citing the deliberate nature of his actions and his abuse of authority as aggravating factors. The convenience store security recordings that captured the electrocution were acquired by the Smithsonian Institution for its exhibition on contemporary civil rights struggles. The curator described it as a 21st century equivalent of the segregated lunch counter protests, a visual document that galvanized a movement for justice. On the first anniversary of the incident, a commemorative march brought thousands of people from across the country. Sterling led the procession from the convenience store to the police station, now a completely transformed institution under Chief Martinez's leadership. Addressing the gathered crowd, Sterling emphasized the work that still remained. A reform department is progress, but it is not victory. True justice requires vigilance and continuous effort. Midway through his speech, Sterling clutched his chest and collapsed. The cardiac damage from the taser attack was finally manifesting in a serious event. He spent 2 weeks in intensive care, his condition a stark reminder of the physical cost that police violence imposes on its victims even years later. During his recovery, Sterling received an unexpected delivery. Hundreds of letters from police officers across the country thanking him for helping change the culture of law enforcement. "Your case made me look at my own department with new eyes," wrote one veteran officer. "I have worn this uniform for 20 years, and your courage is helping me make my final years of service more meaningful by speaking up against the things I used to ignore." When Sterling improved, he made a point of visiting the same convenience store regularly. One morning, he sat in his car watching a young black police officer and a black Army lieutenant conversing amicably beside the coffee counter. Their interaction was relaxed and respectful. In that moment, Sterling saw the tangible results of his painful journey, a small but significant sign that change was possible. His dashboard camera recorded his quiet words. "Perhaps this is what justice looks like. Not perfect, not complete, but possible." What would you do if you witnessed an injustice right in front of you? Would you have the courage to confront it like Colonel Sterling, or the conviction to document the abuse like Officer Jenkins? This story demonstrates that real change demands both individual courage and collective action. If this account of one man's fight against systemic racism moved you, give it a like so others can find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and resistance that deserve to be told. And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up to injustice, though difficult, is always worth it.